most common question I get when I talk about this stuff is, what about those people who just want to take advantage? Like, how do you respond to them? I was training the other morning, and one of my sparring partners, well, he was beating me up, to be fair. He was dominating, and he started cranking my face with his shoulder, which is a bit of a shitty move, but it's definitely effective, and I could still breathe, so I wasn't going to tap, but he had me pinned to the floor, and I couldn't move, and he just kept going harder and harder with this crank, trying to get me to submit. And after a while, I could feel all this anger begin to swell up inside of me, and I exploded, and I lifted him up off of me, and I pushed myself free, and I caught his arm, and I submitted him, and then we went again, and I was still full of all this rage, and I just wanted to make a point, and I submitted him again almost immediately. Now, if there's anywhere that anger is acceptable and an appropriate response, it's probably in martial arts, particularly when someone is trying to smash your face in. But like, it really got me thinking about my anger. Like, to be honest, it scared me a bit at the time. I don't often get angry, and mostly I believe it's far more useful to keep your cool and try and react in a considered way. But in some ways, I do wish I could tap into my anger a little bit easier. You know, anger is a powerful and important emotion. It provides huge amounts of energy when we need it to protect ourselves and our loved ones. Anger is an appropriate response when you or your loved ones are threatened. I felt threatened, so I responded with anger. It's appropriate. But I've definitely also repressed my anger for much of my life and sacrificed myself to keep the peace, or because I've been scared of the repercussions. Most people either suppress their anger for these reasons, or they overindulge their anger and use it as a shield because it hides the vulnerability that lies underneath. But the more I come to understand the emotional wounds that we all carry and how they play out in the way that we treat each other, subconsciously to protect ourselves, the less often I now see anger as the necessary response. Like, most of the time, if someone snaps at us, often seemingly unnecessarily, it's their own pain that's playing out. And so when we respond to that pain with more anger, that comes from our own unhealed wounds as well. And it validates and compounds their pain and escalates the emotions of the moment. In most situations, the correct response to someone getting angry with us should be like, is everything all right? Like, offering compassion, because there's most likely something else that they're dealing with that's underneath the surface that's driving that action. A couple of days ago, I was talking with a guy who runs programs for underprivileged kids in this area. He tries to keep them off the streets and away from gangs, helps them to find purpose and belief in, you know, some possibility for their life. And he gets them into boxing and sets them up with mentors and work experience, like all amazing stuff. But he was telling me about how when he first goes into classrooms to talk about this stuff, the kids all respond in one of two ways. Either they shut down and disengage and they go quiet and don't want to get involved, or they get aggressive and attack, trying to intimidate him and cause trouble. And he said it took him a long time to work out why they were doing that. Like, it didn't make any sense. He was going in to help them, give them opportunities for better life, and they were trying to run him out of the room. And then one day it clicked, and he realised that these kids have been let down so many times in the past that they were just expecting that it would happen again. Like, another person comes into their life, gives them hope, and then fucks off. And they were either ignoring him and not engaging because they didn't expect him to stay around, or they were actively trying to push him away because they didn't expect him to stay around. That's so sad. And when he said that to me, what was even more sad was that I thought back to some of my past relationships and could see without a doubt the same pattern playing out, both from my ex-girlfriends and from my own behaviour too, convinced that the other was going to let us down, so we pushed them away first. Like, they can't walk away if you drive them yourself, right? How fucking sad is that? Like, we pre-disqualify each other because of our own unhealed pain that we've suffered in the past, and the more invested we are, the more risky it gets, the more chance of us getting hurt, the more likely we are to sabotage. It's heartbreaking. Now, as I said, the more that I understand this stuff, the less that I see anger as the right response in most situations, unless you are properly threatened. But that doesn't mean there isn't already suppressed anger trapped in our bodies, potentially towards other people who treated us badly in the past, but also towards ourselves because of our mistakes. And when we allow ourselves to feel into and express that anger, often we find that underneath it is sadness and grief, like it's a shield for our unprocessed pain. I've spoken before about how last year I was holding on to a lot of anger and resentment towards my dad, blaming him for not being more present and a better role model when I was a kid. But when I really tapped into those emotions, I realised that underneath it was grief over the relationship I'd just lost and shame at myself for not showing up better and being stronger. When we hold on to anger and resentment for the things that happened in the past, often, if we really allow ourselves to go into those emotions, we can find that underneath is a feeling of dissatisfaction with some aspect of our current life. Like me blaming my dad for not being more present was actually because I was ashamed of myself for not feeling like enough of a man. When we focus on this anger and blame of others for not showing up in the way that we needed, we are blinding ourselves from the parts of us that still need to heal and grow. If I had already done the work to feel confident enough for myself, would I still have been holding on to anger and resentment of my dad for not being a better role model? Or if I had stayed true to my values and showed up with integrity in my relationship, would I have held on to resentment towards my ex for not being more supportive when I couldn't even tell her when I was struggling? Now, when I say this to people, I often get the response that I'm being too hard on myself and taking the blame for other people's actions. But actually, the more I've taken responsibility, the less I felt like I'm being hard on myself. Like I feel empowered. I can't control what other people do to me, but I can control what I'm going to do as a result. When we blame others for what they did to us, we keep ourselves a victim of life. Now, it doesn't mean that you deserved whatever they did to you. Like the people who hurt you the most are holding on to even more pain of their own, and I do wish them healing too. But when we consciously choose a perspective that takes full ownership for everything we experience, we can use every opportunity as a chance to see where we still need to work on ourselves. Practice that I'm currently thinking about, which is really not pleasant actually, but certainly eye-opening, is to spend some time deliberately thinking about how much pain and suffering I would have had to have gone through to commit some of the horrifying acts of violence that we see in the world. Like, to be in such a dark place that you would want to punish the whole world for your pain is terrifying. Like, even to think for one moment, if you had watched as someone had tortured and murdered your family, like, what do you think you actually would be capable of doing in retaliation? Now, sadly, the world is getting more and more violent and compounding as we retaliate and punish each other for the pain that we're holding on to. We need to be able to respond decisively to protect our loved ones if necessary, but even more so, we all need to be doing the work to begin healing and letting go of the unprocessed pain so we can stop passing it on further. There used to be a meetup in London called Rage Club, where you could go and scream and slam cushions around, punch things, draw frantically to express all these pent-up emotions. And sadly, they don't run it anymore. But I think the fact that that ever even existed at all tells us a lot about our need for deliberate spaces to work through this stuff. You know, boxing classes are great. I used to get a lot from running, just hitting the pavement full pelt to burn off some of that frustration. I also go to a regular men's group that includes a breath work for emotional release practice, culminating in like 30 guys just screaming their lungs out. There's a lot of catharsis in that, and actually it's quite hard to find a space nowadays where you can fully let go and get all of that out without being worried about people hearing you or whatever. Josh, who leads that practice, often runs free breathwork sessions over Zoom, so I'll drop a link to him below along with a few other tools that I can recommend. I'm going to read a passage from a book called You Are Not the Target by Laura Huxley. And it's an amazing book. It's written in 1963, and so much of what she says about how the energy of emotions is transmitted but also stored within our body, it's only relatively recently finally started to become widely accepted. And it really demonstrates the way that we unconsciously project and pass on our anger and pain to one another, and are so often completely oblivious to the real cause. Okay. Scene: a suburb on the outskirts of a great city. Time: early morning. At the entrance of one of the houses stands a pot of fuchsia in dazzling bloom. Mounted on a motor scooter, a teenager comes roaring down the street, hurling folded newspapers at the front doors. One of his shots goes wide and strikes the fuchsia a devastating blow. The shattered plant droops sideways, the flowers trailing in the dust. There are no witnesses to the disaster, and even the delivery boy is unaware of what he has done. Thus is forged the first link in the chain. An accident, unintentional, innocent, and therefore meaningless, or it should be. Let us see how it continues. A few minutes pass, then Mr. X, the owner of the house, comes out to pick up his paper. What kind of man is he? What will he feel when he sees what has happened to the flowers of which he was so proud? How will he act? Mr. X scoops for his paper and sees the broken flowers. His pride and joy, the result of months of tender care, all destroyed. Deliberately, he thinks, by the little devil. Filled with rage, he stamps back into the house. In answer to his wife's inquiring look, he launches into a violent diatribe against the whole race of boys, particularly that boy across the street. Mr. X is certain that the boy has purposely broken his flowers. Well, how do you know? His wife asks. Well, who else could it be? Mr. X answers. And he goes on to say that Mr. Y, the boy's father, is always making trouble. Their son looks exactly like his father, so who else could it be? In this bitter, resentful mood, Mr. X goes down the street to open his neighbourhood drugstore. Unfortunately, Mr. Y, the father of the suspected boy, goes into the drugstore to buy a cigar. Mr. X does not say anything about the fuchsia, does not ask about the neighbour's boy. Had he asked, he would have been informed that the boy had gone away to camp 2 days before. Instead, Mr. X puts on his professional smile and congratulates himself on his self-control. But cunningly, his repressed resentment finds a way to self-expression. Honest, precise Mr. X unconsciously shortchanges his customer. Mr. Y, now at home again, opens his billfold to give his wife some money and realises he's been shortchanged. At the disagreeable prospect of having to go back to the drugstore and confront Mr. X with the error, he's angry and indignant. He takes it out on his wife by complaining of her extravagance. Mrs. Y goes out to shop. Among other items, she shops to buy a brassiere. In the dressing room, she is dissatisfied with her figure and with the brassieres she's trying on. Underlying both annoyances is her memory of her husband's complaint against the druggist, his unfairness to her, and a general anxiety on the whole subject of money. All of this adds up to a state of irritation, which she unthinkingly directs at the saleswoman, who is unable to provide her with a satisfactory brassiere. I am the saleswoman. At this point, the negative chain reaction has touched me. It was initiated by a cheerful youth earning his pocket money by delivering papers in the early morning. It travelled from link to link, and now I am aware that a strong dissatisfaction, a powerful negative energy, is being directed toward my person. My client's dissatisfaction may really be with her own figure or the brassieres or anything in the world, but at this moment it's focused on me. What can I do about it? I see 4 choices. I can pretend to ignore the unpleasantness. If I do this, certain muscular tensions and chemical changes take place in my body, changes of which I remain unconscious and which I have no power to direct. Psychologically, I'm lying to myself. I can remonstrate with a woman and tell her to go and buy a brassiere at some other store. I can be nice to my customer. Or I can acknowledge the impact of this negative energy and transform it to my advantage. Let's see what happens in each instance. The first is a denial of reality, which, if we make a habit of it, may have serious emotional and physical results and is one of the causes of psychosomatic illness. Besides, we cannot cope with reality if we deny it. The second may give me a moment of satisfaction, but it may have bad consequences, one for my job and my business reputation, and the other for the already disturbed woman. If I really do not feel any animosity, if being nice does not make me a martyr in my own eyes, if my blood pressure does not rise and my muscles do not become tense, in other words, if I really understand the incident and I'm not hurt by it, then being nice benefits us both and is indeed a good solution. But unfortunately, it's a rare one. Here is an occasion to apply the principle of transformation of energy. How? I feel the impact of the negative energy. I've trained myself to catch this energy as though it were a ball. I transform this energy and I use it for the purpose that I have chosen. To be able to do this, one must practice. This is the subject of our recipe. You are not the target. Our world is filled with free-floating energy, and we should become aware of the many ways in which we use it, both creatively and destructively. A work of art is a clear example of energy used creatively. So is every human action or emotion that generates good in any direction, in any situation, in any degree. If you evoke a happy smile in a sad child, or if you build a magnificent dam, you are doing the same thing on a different scale. You are using energy creatively. That passage has been stuck in my mind for years, actually. How much pain and suffering could we avoid if we were able to trace back the path of our frustrations? Like, for example, how often do we inadvertently punish our partners or our kids for things that we brought home from work? As Laura points out, all emotion is energy, and when we can be conscious enough to respond instead of just react, we have the chance to decide what to do with it. At its simplest, that might just mean being aware enough to not take it personally when our partner seems to overreact, and use it as a sign to check in with what else they might be struggling with. Being conscious and grounded enough to interrupt and diffuse that energy flow is a gift for everyone around us and can be one of the most healing things that we can offer, releasing the energy from the chain instead of reinforcing it. We've all heard countless stories of athletes and performers who turn comments of haters into fuel that drives them to win. This is the same, and every musician and artist funnels their pain and heartbreak into their work. That's literally its purpose. So when we can consciously choose our response to any situation, we really can turn lead into gold. Now, the most common question I get when I talk about this stuff is, what about those people who just want to take advantage? Like, how do you respond to them? This is not easy, and as we begin to live from this place, people will be drawn to us and want to take whatever they can get. This desire to consume and control is a mask for feelings of unworthiness and insecurity. And as I've said, the people who behave in this way are the ones who have the deepest wounds, possibly more than they are able to face. But the more we can become aware of that and not take things personally, the more we can have compassion for their pain, the more we will be able to maintain grace and actually help them to heal. Accepting people exactly as they are, however their pain manifests itself, releases the shame that keeps them stuck. But that also means us having to stand there in the fire of whatever protection mechanisms people have built in order to hide that part of themselves. And sometimes we will still need to step away for our own protection, or even it might require an anger if our boundaries are being ignored or our safety is being threatened. Now, as I said earlier, the more strong and stable I'm becoming, the more I only focus on my own actions, the less I'm affected by those of others. And if you have no expectations, it's very hard to be taken advantage of. And actually the backwards law of that is the more you give of yourself freely to everyone without needing anything in return, the more will come back to you. Because when you stop reacting to anger with anger or fighting any other emotion, you take away the tension and the resistance that holds it in place. And then it all just melts away. Thanks for watching. If you found this useful and want more, please hit subscribe. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Like, how aware are you of how anger shows up in your life and how do you deal with it? Let me know in the comments, and if there's anything else you'd like me to talk about, then let me know too. Have a great day, and I will see you soon.